He took his boss to lunch at a very nice Italian restaurant in Coney Island.
At a certain point, Luciano excuses himself and goes to the men's room, and just at that point, remarkably enough, in come the assassins and kill Joe the Boss. So Luciano has shifted his allegiance to Joe the Boss's great rival, Salvatore Maranzano.
Predictably, Maranzano embraced Lucky and made him his right-hand man. But Luciano had no patience for his new boss with his old-world traditions.
The old school of Sicilian mafia bosses was very formal and had strict codes of behavior and strict forms of even social forms of address and initiation into the mafia. Luciano wasn't interested in any of that stuff. Bucks is what we're after.
So step 2, kill the new boss. Lucky hired his Jewish friends, including Bugsy Siegel, to be the hitmen. They cornered Maranzano in his office near Grand Central Station.
They opened fire on him and they stabbed him with knives. They just made mincemeat out of him, just blew him away.
Having killed the 2 leading dons in New York, Luciano was now unquestionably the most dominant single gangster in the biggest mob city in America. So Lucky set about Americanizing the mafia. He gathered around him the heads of the major crime families in New York City, Chicago, and Buffalo, and made them into a board of directors. He called it the Commission. To avoid turf battles and maximize profits, they divvied up the rackets. With the end of Prohibition in 1933, the big rackets were gambling, prostitution, narcotics, and extortion. They also created their own group of contract killers, known in the press as Murder Incorporated. The chairman of this commission was Luciano himself. Lucky's organizing paid off. Gangsters started killing each other far less often and making much more money.
Organized crime families were pulling in as much money as the 10 largest industrial corporations in the United States put together.
Luciano's success as chairman of the mob was due to a basic leadership skill. He knew how to listen and get others to listen to him.
When Lucky told a story, when Lucky said anything at all, everybody listened. Yeah, Lucky, yeah. Lucky laughed, everybody laughed. It was just wonderful to watch this. But when he got mad, it was like a knife right at you.
Off the job, Lucky, the confirmed bachelor, enjoyed life as any social climbing multimillionaire would in the midst of the Great Depression.
He lived a very glamorous life, the best nightclubs, the Stork Club, the 21 restaurant, the races. He got around to all the right places, always with a big wad of cash.
He prided himself on the elegance of his clothes. He always had a great, huge white handkerchief just exploding out of his pocket.
In the early 1930s, former President Herbert Hoover kept a New York apartment in the Waldorf Towers. General Douglas MacArthur had an apartment in the Waldorf Towers. And Lucky Luciano moved into the Waldorf Towers. That impressed a great many people.
Especially women, lots of them. What Luciano lacked in the looks department, he made up for in charm and the eternal twin aphrodisiacs, money and power.
I used to get a funny feeling whenever Lucky would walk in a room, and when I was real young, I never could understand that. I didn't realize that's how dopey I was. I didn't realize that it was like a sexual attraction.
He has parties, there are lots of women around, but never any serious relationship. I think it says something about his ultimate selfishness and self-involvement. What he was interested in was his career as the biggest gangster in town, and he didn't want any distractions. He wanted women for momentary amusement, but for nothing more than that.
Luciano was a regular on the Manhattan social scene. The upper crust didn't mind that during business hours, Lucky was a cold-blooded killer, extorting millions.
A lot of white Anglo-Saxon Protestant blue buds used to love to go downtown and see a real live gangster and probably fawn, and I wouldn't have been surprised if they had asked for his autograph. That's the kind of figure he had become. The newspaper people, you got to remember that New York City had 9 newspapers. in that era. All the newsmen knew him, and it was a wave and a hello and hiya, Lucky, and so on.
It was very dangerous. Polanski always said, they'll nail you for this. This is inviting trouble that you don't need. But he loved being Charlie Lucky Luciano, the #1 gangster in town. And he liked to be seen and celebrated. He was always beautifully dressed, expensive cars and jewelry, expensive women, expensive places. He liked that high life and didn't want any intrusion on it.
But in 1935, one man would intrude on it and take away all the luxuries to which Lucky Luciano had become accustomed. His name? Thomas E. Dewey. Just as Lucky Luciano's rise to power was a classic tale of mob intrigue, his demise was one of the most celebrated examples of the crusade against organized crime. The crusader was someone with just as much ambition and cunning as Luciano himself. Thomas E. Dewey, appointed in 1935 as special prosecutor in Manhattan. Dewey established his anti-mob headquarters on the 14th floor of the Woolworth Building. His newsreels addressed the public's growing disenchantment with mob corruption.
The real problem is to remove the influence of the racketeer from politics. Local authorities in New York and in almost every great city in the country hold office by grace of politicians who are in partnership with criminals.
He was honest, he was forthright, time meant nothing to him, and his word meant everything to him. He could be trusted, and he was trusted.
One of Dewey's first targets, a powerful Jewish racketeer in the Bronx, and a founding member of Luciano's commission named Dutch Schultz. The word on the street was that Schultz was planning to kill Dewey. But mob boss Lucky Luciano and the rest of the commission members knew that killing Dewey would only bring more heat on the underworld. So in October 1935, Lucky did the prudent thing. He ordered the killing of Dutch Schultz, seen here examining his bullet wounds moments before he died. After the murder of Schultz, Prosecutor Dewey did not let up. Instead, he turned his fierce gang-busting crusade against the top racketeer in America, Lucky Luciano. Ironically, the racket Dewey nailed Luciano for was not Murder, Inc., or gambling, or extortion, but something to which Lucky paid very little attention: prostitution. One of Luciano's associates, a gangster named Little Davy Batillo, ran the prostitution racket. He and his henchmen extorted money from whores and pimps all over the city in return for providing them with protection.
And so to get the prostitution people to do what he wanted them to do, Batillo would say, well, Lucky's in on this too.
Now, the way things operate in their real world, if Charlie Luciano has given you the authority to operate what is now becoming a very, very lucrative business, you'd be very foolish to say, well, good, and all the money and the profit belongs to me. You'd be crazy to do that. What you should do is once a month you call up Charlie and say, Charlie, in appreciation for all you've done for me, this is for you. And when Charlie accepts that envelope full of cash, he is obtaining the fruits of prostitution.